Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we're talking about the Code of Conduct for Aged Care. My name is Janet Anderson. I'm the Commissioner of the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we're meeting around Australia, and paying my respects to elders past and present, and indeed to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about the new Code of Conduct, and the webinar has been designed specifically for you, the aged care workers, who deliver services day in and day out to older Australians. Now, the term worker is used in the context of the code to cover a wide range of roles, including volunteers, and we will explain that a bit later in the webinar. But the mere fact that you're here indicates that you're interested in learning more about the code. So well done you. Thank you for coming along. And indeed, if there are any providers who are also participating in the webinar, you are welcome to, of course, and thank you for the support you're giving to your team in learning more about the code. I also want to start my remarks with an acknowledgement to you, the workers, for all of the challenges that you've faced in recent times. We've not only had natural disasters such as fires and floods, but of course there has been the pandemic on top of all of that, which has made work even more difficult. Through all those challenges, you've shown resilience and commitment, and most of all compassion for the people for whom you provide care. And I thank you for that. And I would add, it's great that the Fair Work Commission has now delivered an interim decision which will increase the base pay rate for direct care workers. That's a great start. Now, let me move on to the context for the code. The government has announced a very ambitious whole-of-sector reform program to ensure that older Australians receive the care that they need and deserve. And there are two pieces of legislation which have been very significant in passing through Parliament in recent months. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail about them, but one of those pieces of legislation actually contains the Code of Conduct. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. Let's focus on some of that detail and the why, the reason for the Code of Conduct. People receiving aged care always should be treated well and should always feel safe. And I think you're all nodding your heads when I say that. That's self-evident. And that expectation is actually at the heart of the aged care quality standards. So what the code does is describe the behaviour expected of aged care workers, you, and also of approved providers and governing persons, and that means the people in charge, the chief executives and the board members. So as you'll hear today, the responsibilities under the new code are actually the same as what is already expected of you. So while the code is new, the concepts are not new. They are familiar to you in your daily working lives. I expect you are already working and behaving in a way which is consistent with the code. By crystallising it in words, though, what the code does is to help you to better understand exactly what is expected of you in terms of the way you go about delivering care and support to aged care consumers. And through that enhanced understanding of expected behaviours, the ambition for the code is that we over time increase the quality and safety of care and the consumer experience of care. Now, a draft copy of the code has been published, and we will be sharing that copy with you this afternoon, but you can also access it online, and we'll be giving you advice on where you can find it. The code comes into effect on the 1st of December, so quite soon. Now, I lead the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. It's part of our job to assist you to learn about the code. We have obligations in terms of education and support, and this webinar is part of fulfilling those obligations for you. We have also published resources to assist aged care workers to come to grips with the detail in the code And you can find that on our website at our Code of Conduct Worker web page. And if you just put that in the search engine when you get to our website, you will find that. So without further ado, I want to just briefly introduce the panel members. There are two others who've joined me for today's session. Both of them are senior executives working in the Commission. Michelle Bampton will be talking with us about the code and what it means for workers particularly, but also providers and governing persons. And Emma Jobson will be talking about the Commission's role and how we regulate the code. Thank you to everyone who has taken the opportunity of submitting questions before the webinar. We received a lot, and we will get to as many of those as we can after the panelists have completed their presentations. But you also get a chance to submit your questions during the webinar. So use that chat function to put your questions through. And as I say, we'll get to as many as possible. The ones I don't have a chance to put to the panelists, we will answer online, and you will find the questions and the answers on our website. Now, that's probably the end of my introductory comments. Let me invite Michelle Bampton to take the stage to talk with you about the code in detail. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Janet, and hello everyone. Lovely to see so many of you online with us today. As the Commissioner highlighted, the new Code of Conduct for Aged Care will be introduced from the 1st of December. It aims to ensure that all consumers have confidence and trust in the quality and safety of the aged care they receive, regardless of who provides that care. As an aged care worker, you have the most contact with the people receiving care, whether that's in a residential setting or delivering home services. So your behaviour directly affects how people feel about themselves and how safe and supported they feel. And as you know, something as simple as the way you speak to a consumer can make a real difference to how they feel. So listening to and respecting consumers is definitely the kind of behaviour that's consistent with the code. And as Janet said, you'll be familiar with a lot of this. Before we have a closer look at who's covered by the code, let's have a bit of a rundown of the service types that the new code applies to. These are residential care, home care, flexible care, which includes transition care program, multi-purpose services, and short-term restorative care. The code at this stage doesn't apply to the Commonwealth Home Support Program or the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program, the NATCFAC. However, these providers are still required to provide care in a safe and respectful way and to behave in a way that's in keeping with the code. So who does the code apply to? Well, it applies, as Janet said, to aged care workers, and that includes people employed by the approved provider, including volunteers, and it also includes people employed by a contractor or subcontractor of the provider, including volunteers as well. It applies to approved aged care providers themselves and to their governing persons, which are people like CEOs and board members. Examples of aged care workers and governing persons that are required to comply with the code are shown there on the slide that you can see now. And they include people like direct care workers, support workers, lifestyle coordinators and companions, nursing staff, contractors engaged by the provider, kitchen, laundry, gardening, maintenance and office staff, volunteers, as I've said, students, service coordinators and case managers, consultants, trainers and advisors, as well as the people in charge, so people like the executive management team, the CEO, board members, people responsible for the day-to-day operations of the service, and the managers. Examples of people who are not covered by the code include visiting medical practitioners, pharmacists and other allied health professionals who've been requested by or on behalf of a consumer but are not contracted to the provider. Tradespeople are also not covered who perform work that's not under the control of the provider. For example, someone just visiting to do a one-off maintenance type task. So in terms of responsibilities, from the 1st of December, it's your responsibility as an aged care worker to understand and follow the code and to speak up if you've got concerns. As I've said, it's likely you're familiar with the concepts in the code because approved providers are already required to have systems and processes in place to ensure that consumers are treated well and receive safe and high quality care. For example, the quality standards, as Janet mentioned. So the code's useful in clarifying and reinforcing your current responsibilities, but it isn't anything new or different that will be unfamiliar to you. When the code's introduced, if we find an aged care provider or the people who provide the care have behaved in a way that doesn't meet the code, the Commission will take action. The action that we take will depend on the nature of the behaviour and, most importantly, the risk of harm to consumers from that behaviour. And Emma Jobson, who'll be talking later on in this webinar, will talk some more about that and provide more detail. It's important that as aged care workers and governing persons, you consider your behaviour and work to build relationships with consumers and their families and carers so that concerns about behaviour can be resolved directly with the consumer quickly and easily. I also wanted to talk about the relationship with the NDIS Code of Conduct that some of you might be familiar with. And just to note that this Code of Conduct for aged care has been really developed based on the National Disability Insurance Scheme Code of Conduct. And there's some minor differences to reflect the language and definitions that are different in the sector, but essentially, importantly, the responsibilities of workers, providers and governing persons across both the disability and aged care sectors and what people can expect from them are substantially the same. So both codes have a really strong focus on individuals' right to receive safe and quality supports and services, to have confidence in the workforce, and to feel and actually be protected. I'm going to talk now about the code itself. Some of you might have been familiar with, but we'll run through the different elements and I'll talk through some examples of what it means in practice. So the code includes 8 elements that describe the behaviours that consumers can expect from people providing their care. And these are listed through A to H on the slide that you can see. Of course, the code doesn't provide a full list of all the behaviours that support high quality care, but it does provide a good outline of how workers, providers and governing persons should behave. So let's step through the code now and see what it means for you on a day-to-day basis as you go about your role. So element A of the code requires you to respect people's rights to express themselves and make decisions. And element A is really about asking and listening to what consumers need and want, so they have a direct say in how they live and what happens to them. Helping consumers make decisions when they need support, excluding them from decision making or keeping them away from places and activities they want to see and do. So this element's not only about the big life decisions like where do I want to live, but also about those everyday decisions that we make around what we do and how we do it as well. In the next example, I'm going to talk about Slava, who lives in residential aged care and uses a wheelie walker to move about the service and the gardens. The service manager believes that Slava is at risk of falling when she uses the walker by herself and has instructed staff to remove the wheelie walker from her room to make sure she doesn't use it without supervision. Slava asks for it to be returned, saying that without her wheelie walker, she feels stuck in her room and not able to enjoy the time in the garden like she's used to. The service manager says no, that the provider's policy is to remove any falls risk hazards. So making a decision without considering Slava's wishes is not consistent with the code. In this situation, the service manager would be expected to partner with Slava to discuss the risks and identify ways to support her to enjoy time in the garden, consistent with the requirements of the code to respect her self-determination and her decision-making. So element B then is about treating people with dignity and respect and valuing their diversity. This element is about things like respecting a consumer's social, cultural, religious and ethnic background, and not making fun of their background or beliefs. Encouraging consumers to speak up, to live their lives the way they want to, and speak up about their likes and dislikes and not talking down to them. Element C is about respecting people's privacy. And there's a great deal of personal information shared and made available as part of providing aged care. And often this information includes highly sensitive personal and health information, as you know. So let's have a look at what this might look like in practice. Let's take the case of Cynthia, who's recently been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. She'll need increasing care over the coming months, but has asked her home care provider to not disclose information to her family about her diagnosis. Cynthia explains that she needs some time as she's still processing the information herself. Marie, her personal care worker, is often asked by Cynthia's daughter about any care updates that she should know about. Marie doesn't feel comfortable about not being fully transparent with the daughter, but she respects Cynthia's right to choose when and who to disclose the information to about her illness. Marie chooses not to share the information with Cynthia's daughter. In this case, Marie is acting consistently with the code by respecting Cynthia's privacy. This element of the code is about keeping personal information of consumers safe in line with provider practices. And the privacy also includes the need for personal and physical privacy to ensure people feel safe and comfortable. I've got some examples for some elements of the code, but not others, just in the sake of interest of time today. But it doesn't mean that any elements are more important than others. It's just an illustration for today. Element D is about providing high quality care in a safe and competent manner. This element's about keeping people receiving aged care safe from incompetent or unqualified care, unsafe practices and equipment, and environments that might cause harm. It includes having the right skills and experience and qualifications to do the job. Unacceptable behaviour includes not reporting unsafe equipment, unsafe practices, or near misses to your provider. Element E is about acting with integrity, honesty, and transparency. And this, of course, it's very important in developing relationships built on trust. It's about treating consumers fairly and not taking advantage of them. It's just some examples of unacceptable behaviour would include things like lying to your provider or to a consumer about what you know or what you hear or what you see, or doing something like encouraging a consumer to give you money or a gift. Element F is about taking action to uphold quality and safety by promptly responding to issues and concerns. When you identify a potential issue or issues arising regarding the quality and safety of care, you should take immediate action to address it. Aged care workers play a key role in improving care by listening to consumers to gain their feedback on ways to improve the service experience and participating in complaints processes and continuous improvement of services at the direction of the provider. It's unacceptable to not take action about safety or quality. For example, seeing another aged care worker acting inappropriately towards a consumer, or if there was an incident occurring between consumers. Element G is about providing safe care free from all forms of violence and abuse. This element relates to being alert to situations that may hurt, upset, or take advantage of a consumer, knowing what violent, abusive, or neglectful practices look like, and not committing or participating in any form of violence, discrimination, neglect, abuse, or sexual misconduct yourself. It's obviously wrong to engage in any form of violence or abuse, including trying to coerce, force, or threaten a consumer to do something that they don't want to do. And element H, the final element, is about preventing and responding to all forms of violence and abuse. This element's different from element G in that it deals with the actions that occur to prevent incidents and after incidents occur. So aged care workers are expected to foster an environment where consumers feel safe to speak up about their concerns or fears, and identify when consumers are at risk and prevent this occurring as far as possible. Not supporting a person speak up concerns of misconduct is just one example of what would be unacceptable under this element of the code. If you or someone you know has a concern about behaviour that's unsafe, unfair or inappropriate, it's important to speak up. So that's taken us through the elements of the code. I wanted to touch on now around provider responsibilities, the new responsibilities under the code. So providers have existing responsibilities under the Aged Care Act, and this includes the Aged Care Quality Standards. Providers will have a new responsibility under the code to take reasonable steps to ensure that their workers and governing persons comply with the code. So providers are expected to support and prepare you to best carry out your role. And this includes, for example, providing training, making sure policies and procedures are clear and easily accessible, and taking reasonable action to ensure you understand and follow the code. So what about the role of governing persons then in relation to the code? As leaders of the organisation, governing persons such as CEOs and board members are responsible for directing and controlling the executive decisions and the activities of the organisation to enable it to meet their provider responsibilities. This means ensuring that the organisation's systems, practices and culture support compliance with the code. They should take reasonable steps to ensure individuals like yourselves comply with the code. More information about the role of governing persons can be found in Chapter 4 of the guidance document for workers and governing persons, which is available on our Worker Code of Conduct page on our website, which Janet referred to earlier, and we'll give you some details about later. And later in the webinar, you'll also hear more about where workers can go to raise concerns if they don't feel comfortable or safe raising the concerns with someone at your service. So that's about it for me. Just on the further information, as the Commissioner mentioned earlier, we'll be continuing to support you leading up to and beyond the 1st of December through a range of information specially tailored to workers. The Commission is not planning mandatory training for providers, governing persons or workers at this stage because the code requirements are consistent with existing obligations. However, there will be a range of resources available online over the coming weeks to help you understand the code in more detail. And these include frequently asked questions, worker fact sheets, web-based quiz, video, case studies, and an online learning module through our Aged Care Learning Information Solution. We're also translating some of the educational resources into 25 different languages, and easy English versions will also be available. So keep an eye on that Code of Conduct Worker webpage for new resources as they become available. That's it for me. I'll hand back to you. Thank you, Janet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, we've had a number of questions. I am going to interrupt the routine and actually put a question back to you right now because these are relatively simply addressed, and I think it would be useful to do them now. David and Twee and a couple of others have asked about inclusions and exclusions. So just quickly, contractors who provide kitchen, laundry, cleaning services, covered in or out?
In.
In. Students?
In.
Okay. And IT staff, admin staff and receptionists?
All in, all covered, as long as they are either working for the provider or working for a contractor that's contracted to the provider, all in.
Great. Well done. And thank you to everyone who has submitted questions so far. Keep the questions coming. Really useful to get feedback from you as we go if there's any clarity required. Just another comment about Michelle's presentation. She used a few case studies, and obviously, while they're drawn from real life, what we're looking for every single worker to do is to exercise judgment about behaviours, because you can't categorise absolutely everything, and there will be instances where you need to make a decision for yourself about what's right, what's best, and what you should avoid doing. Okay, just moving briefly to provider responsibilities, which might be another question you have in your mind, because providers, of course, do have responsibilities in relation to the Code of Conduct, including supporting you to fulfil the expectations, the behaviours under that code. There are a number of existing provider responsibilities which reinforce the contents of the code, and they include the responsibilities set out in the quality standards, in the Charter of Aged Care Rights, in the Quality of Care Principles, and also the rules that relate to incident management systems and the Serious Incident Response Scheme. So the code is supported by and reinforced by all of those requirements. So everything is pulling in the same direction. Now, before I move to our next speaker, I just want to raise for your attention that we do value your feedback, not just in the questions you asked during the webinar, but also in a survey which is available to you now or at the end of the webinar. If you want to fill it out before we get to the end, then you can do that. But it will flash up on the screen at the end, and we would value you participating in it and providing your response to it. You can get to it using the yellow speech bubble icon now. Okay, next speaker is Emma Jobson. Emma's going to talk to us about the work that the Commission does, what our role is in relation to the code, and how we're going to regulate the code. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks everyone who's here for joining us today. So broadly, the Commission's overarching role, as set out in our legislation, is to protect and enhance the safety, health, wellbeing and quality of life of people receiving aged care services. So in fulfilling this role, we're committed to providing education and support to consumers, workers like yourselves, providers, governing persons, so that everyone knows about the Code of Conduct and you know what you need to do. So when the code is introduced, if we find an aged care provider, a governing person or an aged care worker has behaved or is behaving in a way that is inconsistent with the code, we will take action. This may be working with the provider to resolve complaints about conduct that is inconsistent with the code. In certain cases, usually where the conduct, the risk or outcome for consumers is more serious, we may also investigate. And where needed, we will take further action, which I'll cover more on this shortly. So the Commission may identify concerns about conduct that is inconsistent with the code in various ways. So I'll step through these now. It may be through complaints we receive from consumers, representatives, families or carers, aged care workers, advocates, other regulatory bodies, or anyone else. It may be through information obtained during our own monitoring site visits, such as a reaccreditation site audit. It may be a reportable incident notification under the Serious Incident Response Scheme, or via our customer contact centre. The concerns raised might be about the provider's own conduct, as well as the conduct of its aged care workers or governing persons. So approved providers have responsibilities to take action and reduce risk to consumers that might arise from incidents, complaints, and any issues relating to their compliance, including with the code. For example, providers are expected to manage incidents and take reasonable steps to prevent incidents, including notifying the Commission of reportable incidents, as well as establishing and using a complaints resolution mechanism to address complaints. So in the majority of cases where information is received about conduct inconsistent with the code, we will continue to work with the provider as we do now, either through managing a complaint or dealing with a reportable incident. And as always, our response will be focused on the best way to protect and enhance the safety and wellbeing of aged care consumers. So what actions might we take when we do this? We have a range of tools and powers to deal with behaviour that is inconsistent with the code and to respond to providers who fail to take reasonable steps to ensure that their workers and governing persons comply with the code. In response to information about conduct inconsistent with the code, we can do a range of things, and I'll step through them. This may include, we could discuss the information with a provider aged care worker, governing person, consumer, consumer's representative, or a complainant, or any other person. We might request or require a provider or another person to give the Commission information or documents. We may require a provider to take specific actions, such as ensuring that a worker doesn't work unsupervised while a matter is looked into. We could require a provider to undertake an investigation, or the Commission may undertake our own investigation. So where we do decide to undertake an investigation about the conduct of an aged care worker or governing person, the Commission will engage directly with the individual as part of the investigation. We may also issue a caution letter to notify an individual that the Commission is aware of conduct of concern that needs to be addressed by the individual, including any non-compliance. In addition, we may also provide education about provider responsibilities or educate an individual worker or governing person about their responsibilities under the Code. In some circumstances, we might record the concerns and take no immediate action, such as where the Commission already has enough information to determine that a provider has responded appropriately and the risks for consumers are being well managed. So at any time we can refer or share information about conduct inconsistent with the Code with another responsible body, for example, the police, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, or the National NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. The Commission will consider the role providers play in relation to concerns about the Code, the conduct of their aged care workers and governing persons. And this includes whether there were any failures by the provider. So, for example, a worker's conduct might be attributed in part to a provider. It may include things like unsafe workload demands, poor access to appropriate resources and training, low levels of supervision or insufficient support, issues with policies or procedures. So the Commission may take action in response to a provider's non-compliance or possible non-compliance with their responsibility to comply with the Code, or take reasonable steps to ensure that their aged care workers and governing persons also comply with the Code. So this may include issuing the provider with a Code of Conduct compliance notice or other compliance and enforcement actions which are detailed in our compliance and enforcement policy, which is available on our website. A compliance notice with regard to the Code compels the provider to address the actual or possible non-compliance, and it will outline any action the provider must take or refrain from taking within a reasonable period of time. So in the most serious cases of poor conduct, or individuals are found not suitable to work in aged care, the Commission could issue a banning order. A banning order can stop or restrict a person, either permanently or for a specified period, from engaging in, providing or being involved in the provision of aged care. The Commission also has the power to issue a banning order for a person who has not previously been an aged care worker or governing person of an aged care approved provider. So in this case, the banning order is not related to non-compliance with the Code of Conduct. Rather, the banning order may be made where the Commission reasonably believes that the individual is not suitable to be involved in the provision of aged care. So, for example, the individual may have been convicted of a serious offence called an indictable offence, or an NDIS banning order is already in force. So while we're confident that in the vast majority of cases, a worker, provider or governing persons would respond quickly and in the right way to our regulatory actions, we can expect that in a few cases the use of banning orders will be appropriate and warranted. A register of banning orders will be published on our website once the Code commences, and further information about banning orders is included in our draft worker guidance resource, also on our website. So there may be instances where the Commission considers conduct that occurs outside the provision of care supports and services, where serious concerns are raised about the ability of an individual or an organisation to deliver quality and safe aged care. This can include where the conduct or where it's carried on outside of work hours or the service premises. For example, where an aged care worker inappropriately posts information about a consumer on social media, or where an aged care worker badmouths a consumer to someone else. We may also consider conduct where new consumers are looking to enter a residential service or receive services from a home care provider. This includes the period before entry to a service or contracts are in place. For example, where a provider or its aged care worker discriminates against the prospective or new consumer based on their race or religion. So, procedural fairness. The legislation includes protections that ensure that providers, aged care workers and governing persons are given the chance to respond to concerns before decisions are made. So if someone raises a concern that a worker or governing person has engaged in behaviour inconsistent with the code, then they will have the opportunity to respond before a decision is made on the Commission's response. Before the Commission issues a banning order, we must first notify the relevant individual in writing that an order is being considered and provide an opportunity for the individual to put forward their case. The only exception to this is where the decision maker reasonably believes that there is an immediate and severe risk to the health, safety or wellbeing of one or more consumers. So where a banning order has been issued, there are avenues for reconsideration and review. For example, an individual can apply to have the banning order or a condition of the banning order varied or revoked. So to support aged care workers and governing persons, the Commission will be releasing further guidance specifically on the banning order process, including how to make submissions and the review and reconsideration process. So we want to reassure you that we will always listen to all sides of the story and give individual workers or governing persons a chance to respond to any concerns or findings, except where we're very concerned about the severe and immediate harm for a consumer. As I've outlined, there are avenues for internal and external review of decisions we make, and we'll be providing further guidance and advice on that process and how to participate in it. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand you back to the Commissioner.
Great, thanks Emma. That's a lot of information, but we've had some really good questions which indicate that you're following closely, and thank you everyone for staying the course. Couple of quick ones I'll deal with at the outset. A few people have asked about the timing for publication of the final Code of Conduct and our guidance. That's a little out of our hands. We don't actually determine that schedule. That is determined by processes of government. You can rest assured we are very eager to finalise all of these resources and obviously to make available the final version of the code. And we will do that the minute we are able to, so I can assure you of that. There is also a question, I might come to that a little later. Let me go to Michelle. Michelle, I have a couple of questions that are coming for you. There's a question about whether workers are required to sign the Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Janet. The simple answer is no. Workers are not required to sign the Code of Conduct. It's not a requirement of the legislation. Aged care providers might have different requirements for their staff, and providers might require their staff to sign off, but that's really up to the provider to make sure that the workers have enough information and understand the code and are aware of it so that they can comply with the code as part of their employment. So the Commission considers a worker's compliance with the code only and doesn't make any decisions regarding about a worker's employment contract or what they need to sign or not sign as part of their employment.
Okay. One question which was submitted beforehand, but I suspect we also have people online who are in the same circumstance. Workers who deliver both aged care services and NDIS services and supports. What's the situation with our Code of Conduct for aged care for those workers, and what things do they need to keep in mind? Michelle.
Yes, it's a good question. If you're a worker or a provider that delivers both aged care services and National Disability Insurance Scheme services, you're required to comply with the Code of Conduct for Aged Care and the NDIS Code of Conduct. So both the Code of Conduct for Aged Care and the NDIS Code will apply. However, due to the similarities of codes, it shouldn't place additional burden on people because it all cause confusion for staff or for consumers because they're substantially the same. It's important to remember that the NDIS Code of Conduct and the Aged Care Code of Conduct are the same, so that appropriate behaviour is understood in similar ways across both the care sectors. And although the code is new, the Aged Care Code is new, presenting anything new in terms of how workers behave in any case because of those responsibilities that are already in place. And we are working with the NDIS going forwards as well to make sure that we are connected with them and working with them around how we implement the Code of Conduct for Aged Care as well.
All right, a last one in this sequence, given that your mic is open. Why does the code apply to previous workers?
So, workers can move in and out of aged care and move between employers. So the legislation includes provisions that enable the Commission to respond to a worker's non-compliance with the Code of Conduct in the past, even if the worker has moved on from the role they were performing at the time when the concerns were raised. It's important to note that this would apply to non-compliance only from the time the code came into law, which would be from the 1st of December 2022.
Well, I fibbed. There's one more that's just come in from Elisa. Will this replace the Charter of Aged Care Rights, or is it in addition to that?
It's in addition to that, but it's totally consistent with that. And if you have a look at the Charter, you'll recognise many of the concepts and much of the language that exists in the code as well. So definitely both, but totally consistent.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go to Emma. Emma, I've got a line of questions for you. From a worker, what if I notice a colleague being abusive towards a resident, but the resident doesn't want to report this and get the worker into trouble? Does the code have something to say about what I, the worker, should do in this situation?
Yes. Thanks, Janet. Yes, it does. So as a worker, under the code, you have a responsibility to take all reasonable steps to prevent and respond to all forms of violence, discrimination, exploitation, neglect, abuse, sexual misconduct. So it would be inconsistent with the code if you witness abusive behaviour by another worker but fail to take appropriate action to respond to the incident and prevent it from happening in the future. So in this situation, you should respond by raising the issue with your provider or directly with the Commission. So it's never okay for a worker to be abusive towards a consumer, as we all know. And if you know about this type of behaviour, you must now take action. Okay,
that's clear. Well done. Another question that was pre-submitted. If concerns are raised about a worker assaulting a resident with dementia and they then leave the workplace, can they move to a new workplace with no record of the issues raised?
Yeah, this is a good question and one we get a lot, Janet. So there's sort of a two-part answer. Any new employer should be undertaking the appropriate pre-employment checks, of course, in relation to a prospective employee. So this would include the reference check and confirmation that workers have a current police certificate showing that they do not have an assault conviction or a current NDIS worker screening clearance. And we would hope that through this process, a new employer would identify if there are serious concerns about a worker's conduct with their recent or past employer. From the Commission's perspective, if we have concerns about a worker, we can continue to look into the matter even if the worker has moved on from previous roles. So the Commission is also able to issue a banning order even if someone isn't currently working in aged care, let alone at the same provider. So these are all important safeguards in the legislation to ensure that workers can't leave their job as a way of avoiding consequences of inappropriate conduct.
Okay. All right, we've talked about the banning register. There's a question here, will there be a database that all workers would need to be registered on, or is it only for those who have been banned?
So at this point, it's a very simple answer. So the government has made a commitment to introduce a registration scheme for aged care workers. There's one in place for disability workers, but currently until that registration scheme is in place, which it is not, the register will be of individuals who are subject to a banning order in aged care.
Okay. And in terms of those who are subject to a banning order, is there a time limit for how long a person would remain on the register?
Yeah, so we will be publishing the banning order register, which identifies the banning orders that are currently in force. The duration for a banning order is identified as in force. Will depend on how long the banning order has been made for, so that's part of the banning order decision. So further details, we're going to be developing further details about the publication of the banning order register. They'll be on our website as they're finalised, and this will include information about whether the banning orders, once they are no longer in force, will remain on the register. We note that the NDIS Commission keeps the names of people with expired banning orders on their register. So we're in the process of finalising our approach to that issue.
Okay, there's a question which has come in from Danielle. Will the banning register have to be checked prior to employing any new staff in aged care and engaging contractors, volunteers, students, etc.? And Danielle's added, this is a huge change of practice and increasing workload if so. I'm going to start the answer and then hand over to you. It makes good sense that any prospective employer would want to understand whether they're employing somebody of good character who has a strong history of performance, good performance in aged care. I can't imagine there'd be an employer anywhere in the country who would be uninterested in confirming that. So I'm a little bit surprised at the question. You ask as if it were a matter of compulsion. I would have thought it's common sense that an employer would look to the banning register to check whether the name of an applicant was on the register. Emma, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that is the purpose of the register, to have that information available, particularly to prospective employers. And these issues will be also, I think, more easily managed under a full implementation of a registration scheme. But providers do have responsibilities under the range of obligations, including the quality standards to protect and prevent harm to consumers. And we would, I think, be considering if something occurred due to these sorts of checks not occurring in the recruitment process, that would be something we would be looking into.
This interesting question also come through from Judy. How do you, I'll stay with you, Emma, how do you see the actions of the Commission tying in with internal procedures a provider may have in place to investigate and manage misconduct? And obviously there's a close link. If you could just sort of articulate that in a few sentences. We would have close regard to the way in which providers were understanding behaviour and calling out misbehaviour or misconduct, would we not?
Yes, I think the provider's response where we're seeing issues of concern with regard to appropriate conduct will be often our first point of call. So we'll be very keen to understand how providers are meeting their responsibilities in dealing with the risk. I think at times it might be the case, though, that the Commission may know more than the current provider. That's one scenario, and so we may still choose to undertake our own investigative process. But we would cooperate and be working with that provider to understand, not interfere with their process, I think. Yeah.
Emma, staying with you still, because there are lots of questions. When people raise concerns with the Commission, do they have to identify themselves, or can they do so anonymously if they're concerned about identifying themselves?
Yes, people can raise concerns anonymously and confidentially either with the Commission, and that's currently the case under our complaint scheme as well. There's quite detailed information on how that works around our complaint scheme on our website at the moment.
Okay, Michelle, back to you. There's a question here. How are online platforms that connect people with independent support in the community regulated when support workers with ABNs provide the services? And it's a question in relation to the code.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. The Code of Conduct applies to all aged care workers, governing persons, regardless of the nature of their employment. So if they're an aged care provider or a contractor contracted to deliver aged care services, then the code will apply to them equally. So those people are covered by the code the same as workers across the rest of the sector.
Okay. Oh, I've got some more on the banning register. I'll have to go back to Emma. Emma, Rachel has asked, where will the banning register be held and how do we access it?
Mhm.
And then Jacinta has asked, is the register public to anyone or do we have logins?
Or do we have, what was the last?
A login, do they have?
Right, yes, it is a public register. It'll be on our website. That's the simplest answer, yes.
Okay, so anyone, in fact, could.
Anyone, yes.
All right. And the question here from Jaswinder, does it prevent a worker in a disability, if a worker is on a banned register for aged care, does it prevent them from working in disability services and vice versa?
The banning orders that we make under our legislation only apply to aged care, but we are sharing information with other regulators, including the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission, and likewise they with us, and it would be their process and decision on how they regarded that information.
Okay, all right, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. We may have time for one or two more. Emma, I'll stay with you. Question that we received beforehand. If I work in home services and I have a suspicion that a family member or a neighbour may be taking advantage of a person receiving care, maybe taking money out of their account, but I don't necessarily have proof of this. What do I do about that? And is that covered under the code?
Yeah, well, sometimes as aged care workers, you may see things that concern you, and I think if possible, we encourage workers to start by speaking with the consumer themselves, but to see if they need some support to take action themselves, I guess. But whether or not you can speak with the consumer, it's always best to take your concerns to your employer, most likely a manager. In some instances, it might be appropriate for your employer to engage with the police, and at times this would be because an aged care provider that they need to make a notification under the Serious Incident Response Scheme, which would include reporting the incident to the police. So there are other obligations to consider as well. The organisations or providers that you work for also have to meet these other responsibilities, and these include capturing any incidents, whether actual or suspected, that cause or could cause harm to any person in their care, reporting the incident, whether actual or suspected, to police within 24 hours if they are reasonable grounds to do so, and supporting the health, safety and wellbeing of consumers, including by referring them to appropriate services such as the Older Persons Advocacy Networks, or OPAN, or Elder Help 1800. So there are now and coming into place in home care, other obligations around notifications and responding to incidents and these sorts of concerns.
But there are also these advocacy organisations which are vital in, and aged care workers should know about them and feel comfortable in approaching them if they have concerns that aren't squarely reportable in another domain.
Yes.
Emma, last question, and I expect a brief one before we wrap up. Will the Commission refer matters to other agencies?
Yeah, Janet, so I touched on this, but it is a longer list. At any stage, we may refer information to another organisation where we think that information is relevant. So we have powers to release that information where it's consistent with our legal obligations. This may be to, as I said earlier, the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. This might be because we've issued a banning order, the scenario we covered before in aged care, but we know an NDIS participant is a party, that worker may also be working for an NDIS provider. It may be where an NDIS participant is a party to a reportable incident, or where a complaint or concern raised about an aged care worker impacts an NDIS participant. So we also make referrals to the relevant state coroners where there are circumstances involving reportable deaths. We make referrals to police where there are matters which might suggest criminal conduct. We refer to the AHPRA, so the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, where there are concerns with regard to aged care workers who also might be registered health professionals. We make referrals to Services Australia about aged care payments management, including fraud investigations, and to other state authorities responsible for the investigation of conduct of unregistered healthcare workers, including the healthcare complaints bodies. So I think that's a fairly comprehensive list that certainly answers the question.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of the time we have available for questions and answers. I want to make a few closing comments. Some of you might be wondering, what do you do now? And I have some tips for you. Have a look at our draft resource online, which is unlikely to be radically changed between draft and final. So use that as a guide and allow it, get immersed in it, seek to understand your obligations. But these are the tips. Read the code, which we've shared with you today, and make sure you understand it. And in particular, understand what good behaviour looks like and when conduct is not acceptable. Talk about it with your fellow workers to check that you have the same understanding of the words. And talk about it with your employer, the approved provider, particularly to check that you understand what behaviours are appropriate, or where you're uncertain about something that you've read. Know where to find more information about the code, and that's our website. Use that as your go-to resource. And know also, as Emma was talking about, when or how to raise concerns if you're worried about someone else's conduct, because that is also an obligation under the code. So make sure you're well placed and your colleagues around you to perform as you do now, consistently with the code. If you have concerns, as I said, about a colleague, then it's important for you to speak up, and you should feel safe to do that. You can, if you are concerned about some behaviour and are not sure what to do, you can absolutely contact us. We have an online contact form you'll find on our website, and we also have an 1800 number, which you'll find there as well. Many thanks to Michelle and Emma for the information that they've shared today. We will continue to support you to learn about the code and to fulfill the obligations you have under the code. Remember that your provider has obligations as well. You're not in this alone, and we will be relying on your providers to continue to make information available to you as we feed it through to them. I also wanted to mention that we are also supporting consumers and family members to understand about the code, and we have fact sheets and videos and guidance available for them too, as well as publishing translated and easy English resources, which you could access just as readily as consumers. Keep an eye on our website where we're posting updates all the time. And I think Cameron asked, will this webinar be recorded? Yes. We've made a recording of this webinar. We will be posting it for you to access along with the PowerPoint slides, and we'll be sending you an email link to them as soon as they become available. If you haven't already done so, please, would you stay online to complete our feedback survey, because that's the way we learn about whether we're meeting your needs. And that's the way we are looking always to improve the way in which we can support you. Many thanks to all of you for staying the course, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.